Hi, I'm Rick Griffith, and I'll be your instructor for the video training for the international students. This normally is known as non-resident returns. I'll be addressing as a foreign students. This course will be primarily geared toward the F1, J1 visa students who are participating in the VITA program, Volunteer Income Tax Assistance. This course can be used by anyone. Any other students who are doing their own returns with possibly the Free File Alliance, doing their taxes online, can use this as a reference. This course is basically geared toward our volunteers who are training for the non-resident student returns. They've taken the Link and Learn taxes for those who would be interested in looking at the Link and Learn taxes course on irs.gov. Go to irs.gov online, type in Link and Learn taxes in the search box. It'll take you to the course material for this lesson. It's lengthy, a little bit involved, but it'll get you through the training. I will be showing highlights of that training. Normally you have to take the basic and advanced test, or the advanced test I should say, to be eligible to take the non-resident or foreign student section of the Link and Learn taxes. Once you've taken the test, or before you take the test, I would go through the course material. I would look at go to the tax layer, to the practice lab. In that section, there's a section on for NR returns. It gives you some good examples of using the tax layer software program for doing the foreign student taxes. I would mention that if you're doing it online with some other software, the VITA program uses the tax layer software, but all other software programs that do have the NR section are very similar. What you find in this course you can use for the other software programs. So feel free to go through the course. At the end of that course, you'll probably know more than 95% of all the tax preparers and CPAs in the United States. This is a very specialized area of training, and it's geared only toward the foreign students. So let's get started. Okay, let's start out about talking some of the terminology we use for the foreign student taxes. This area is, like I said, a very specialized area of taxation in the United States. It only applies to the 500, 700,000 foreign students in the United States. So there's some terminology that I'm sure you're not familiar with, and is actually terminology that many people in the United States are not aware of. The first one is what we call non-resident alien. This is a person who is temporarily in the United States, usually as a student, a visitor, possibly temporary work. And the ideal is they're non-immigrant. They're not immigrating to the United States, and that after they finish whatever purpose they're here for, visiting, training, working, they return to their home country. The opposite of non-resident alien is resident alien. Those are the ones that come to the United States and tend to stay here on a fairly regular or permanent basis. Those are more familiar with the persons who have green cards. You may be familiar with that. And so they're usually legal residents of the United States, and for tax purposes they're treated the same as U.S. citizens. So they'll do their taxes in the same way. Non-residents, however, the taxes are a little bit different. The forms are a little bit different. So it's a specialized area. As you do the Lincoln Learn Taxes course, you'll do the advanced course first for domestic returns. Those are the returns that persons in the United States, residents or citizens, will be doing. Then when you get into the foreign student taxes, that will take you into a different area that's specialized for the foreign students. I want to mention a test that we have to determine whether you're resident or still in non-immigrant status as a foreign student, and that's the substantial presence test. You've entered the United States on, generally in this course, a F1 or J1 visa. There could be a couple others for students, M or Q, which is very rare. In that case, you have 5 years for a F1 or J1 student, or possibly 2 years for a J1 scholar to reside in the United States to complete your training. If for some reason you were to exceed that time period or your visa expires, then the United States will start counting what they call a substantial presence test. The substantial presence test basically, very generally, is once you've been here for 6 months in the country, you're not on a visa at that time, then you become resident for U.S. tax purposes, not immigration purposes, only for U.S. tax purposes. You'll be treated as a resident, and then you would be filing taxes like a U.S. resident. The substantial presence test gets a little more involved. We actually look at a 3-year time period. But generally, if you've been here 6 months this year, then you would become resident for that year. I mentioned that because for foreign students on F1 or J1 visa, generally you're considered exempt from that substantial presence test because you're on a student visa that's generally good for 5 years. So sometimes you may see the terminology exempt individual. Well, that's all it is a person who is exempt from the substantial presence test. In other words, they cannot become resident in the United States while they're still in their visa period. The non-immigrant visas I mentioned are the F and J, is primarily for students and scholars. There could be a couple others, the M or Q, which are vocational and cultural exchange. For our purposes, we're operating under the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program of the IRS, and as a VITA volunteer, we limit the number of returns to those within what we call our scope, or what areas that we will do taxes for the foreign students for free. We don't do complicated returns. So items that fall out of our scope, such as business income, complicated investments, things like that, you would have to refer the foreign student to a professional tax preparer. And I might mention that there's very few professional tax preparers know much about the non-resident tax subjects. So it's going to be kind of tough for those people. However, we will only do the more simpler returns that our VITA volunteers can handle. In that instance, as you're looking at the scope chart, you'll see most areas of income, dividends, possibly capital gains on sale of stocks, nothing real complicated there. Social Security income, that would be extremely rare for a foreign student. But those are the most, our gambling winnings might be pretty common if you've gone to a casino and won some money. The other part of it is on deductions. Foreign students are not allowed a standard deduction, so they can only be permitted to have certain itemized deductions, of which may be state or local income taxes, I should say. If you get a refund from those, that would be treated as income. Your other itemized deductions would be gifts or or contributions to U.S. charities. In the past, we allowed some job expenses. That's no longer the case. That provision has been repealed. Your student loan interest deduction would also be deductible. You would have learned about that in our advanced course for domestic returns, and also implications of Social Security taxes, unemployment compensation, the gambling winnings. Okay, next is I just want to make mention of a couple of changes for the year 2018. We did have a Tax Reform Act. Basically, did not affect too many non-residents, except for two major changes. One, the tax rates actually went down a little bit. So the amount of tax is a little bit lower this year. However, the big provision that affects foreign students the most is there no longer is an amount for personal exemptions, or in other words, personal exemption deduction is zero. The term is still there, but there is no amount for personal exemptions. And for many foreign students, this is one of the major deductions they had against their income. So we may see more students paying an additional tax this year, and in future years, they possibly need to go to their employers and have a little bit more withholding taken out of their checks. So their more taxes being paid in during the year, so that at the end of the year, they don't have a large tax bill that they're going to have to come up with the money and pay. So it's preferable to have it taken out over time, a little bit on each paycheck to cover your taxes. So if you end up having a balance due at the end of the year and you have a tax bill, then you probably need to adjust your withholding with your employers so they take out a little bit during the year. Our next slide, we're talking about some of the basics that we've seen in the domestic course. But that's filing status, exemptions, and standard or itemized deductions. First of all, for foreign students, it's different. You only have either single or married filing separate, or in the case of the non-residents, it just says married non-resident on the tax form. In these, all the other filing statuses for domestic persons are not included, except possibly qualifying widow or widower, which would be very rare for students. But single is just what it says. You're single, not married. Married is simply what it says. You're married. Your spouse would not be filing a joint return with you. They have to file a separate return. But in case you're a little unclear on whether you're single or married, please ask your spouse. They will clarify it for you. On exemptions, as I mentioned, on personal exemptions, there's no longer a deduction amount. However, you may need to look at one, there's personal exemptions and dependent exemptions. Personal is you or your spouse. Dependents would be your children. You still have to look at those tests to see if possibly you could qualify for an additional credit later on. But as far as exemptions go, there is no deduction any longer for exemptions, personal or dependent. The only allowable dependents anyway for foreign students is only if you're from Canada or Mexico, and then some special cases for India and South Korea we'll look at in just a moment. As far as standard or itemized deductions, there is no standard deduction for foreign students, with the exception of Indian students. By treaty, they are allowed the standard deduction amount. All others, there is no standard deduction. You would have to itemize whatever items that qualify for itemized deductions. Again, just want to note that the Indian students are eligible for a standard deduction by treaty. All other students are only eligible for the itemized deductions. Are there any exemptions for spouses and children? Like I said, no, there's no personal exemption amount any longer. However, you may need to take a look to see if someone qualifies as a dependent for possibly other credits. And then, as I mentioned, only Canada and Mexico, dependents, whether they live with or away from their parents, can be claimed. For the Republic of South Korea, they can claim children who live with them as dependents. And for India, they can only claim dependency for children who are born in the United States. Next, we want to talk about, is there any income that's exempt from taxes for foreign students? Well, yes, there is. A few things. Number one, the major thing that foreign students are exempt from is including interest into their income. Interest being interest on checking, savings, money market, or certificate of deposits in a bank. So bank deposits in general are excludable from income for the foreign students. If you have interest from other countries, so forth, generally that's not includable. But if it's interest from other things such as loans and so forth in the United States, that could be included. But generally, most interest that we see for foreign students would be excludable from income. Some countries have tax treaties with the United States that allows them to exclude some of their income possibly, or any or all of their scholarship that they have. Here's an example of a tax treaty from South Korea. This is out of a publication 501, Tax Treaties. All the publications I mentioned, by the way, can be found on irs.gov. Go to Forms and Publications and search for publication 501, or 901, excuse me. In this case, this is an example from South Korea, and we'll see it later also. It shows the type of income. In this case, we would be looking at studying and training. So in subcategory would be compensation while gaining experience. And it says that's good for 5 years because that's the term of the F1 visa. And then it's for any foreign or U.S. resident. So if you're here in the United States, it applies. And there's a limit of $2,000 that you can exclude from your income if you're from the Republic of South Korea. Also, it shows a treaty article that you'll need when you fill out the tax return to show what income is exempt from taxes. This publication is online if you need to get a more intense study of the treaties. However, we have a publication 4011. It's the Foreign Students and Scholar Resource Guide. Often we refer to it as our desk guide. A lot of the information I'm giving you in this course will be contained in this guide, which should be at your VITA site. So you'll have this as reference while you're doing the foreign taxes. Very useful. I would also mention that if you have other questions that you don't know if it's within the scope of the program or other issues, your site coordinator should be able to help you on those issues also. Our next slide shows actually what the tax treaty table is in the 4011 guide. It's a little bit simpler than trying to read the publication 901. It shows the country. It shows generally the 5-year period for the F1, J1 students, and then the maximum dollar amount that's allowed to be excluded from your income by treaty. And then again, the treaty article which you will need to input into the software. Okay, let's look at some steps for completing the 1040 NR. These are only for illustration purposes. it mentions that it's an example from South Korea, but not really. I want you to be able to see what the forms look like that you're getting the information from to enter into the software program, such as W-2s, 1099, so forth. And also a little bit about what the tax form looks like after you've put the information into the software program to see how it looks on the return. We'll go into this a little more detail. First up is probably the most common, and that's Form W-2. This is where income is reported by employers to their employees at the end of the year, and it shows the amount of your gross income, how much was taken out for federal income tax withholding, and that's generally about all you'll see on the W-2. I might point out if a student lived in and worked in a different state during part of the year, there could possibly be state income taxes listed at the bottom of the W-2 form. Also, some employers don't always fill these out correctly for foreign students. Most employers in the United States have no idea about taxes for foreign students. So many of them mistakenly, or they just don't know that Social Security amounts should be withheld from foreign students. So some employers will inadvertently, or actually some actually do it on purpose, but they're in their legal rights, show that Social Security wages have been withheld and paid into the government. In this case, it puts a bit of a hardship on the students that's money being paid into the government that they shouldn't have and that they could have used. It is possible to claim and get a refund of this money, and we'll see a detailed example of that a little bit later. Our next form that we're looking at is issued by usually some of the universities. Rarely will you see this from an employer, but it's possible. And that's Form 1042S. It's only for foreign persons' U.S. source income. And on this form, there will probably be one or two of these forms that you receive at the end of the year from the university if you worked on campus, or possibly just for scholarships if you did not work. Number one would be looking at the form. On box one is income code 20, which means income. In this case, it shows the amount of $5,000. And if we look at our example from France, where they would have a $5,000 treaty exclusion, and that's what this form is showing, that $5,000 of income excluded by treaty and not shown on the tax return, or not included as income, I should say. There will be a part on the tax return where you will show this along with any scholarship amount. Also, a scholarship would be reported on the same form that's excluded by treaty. It would be income code 16, and it would show the dollar amount that's being excluded. One thing that you may have learned in the domestic taxes advanced course is that scholarships generally are not taxable if used for tuition fees, books, and so forth, required equipment. You learn that usually room and board was taxable under domestic rules. However, for foreign students under treaty only, all of the scholarship, regardless of how it's used, room, board, tuition, fees, books, all of it is excluded by treaty for the foreign student. Now, for the foreign students, there's approximately 32 countries that have tax treaties with the United States. And not all of those necessarily have benefits for students. But out of the roughly 130 some odd countries in the world, there's only about 32 that have tax treaties with the United States that apply to the foreign students. So not all students will have a benefit from treaties. For those countries that don't have a benefit by treaty, then their income is reported just as normal income, and it's fully taxable. Another form that you might see, not too common, but you see it pretty often, is the Form 1099-G. The 1049-G is reported usually by the state, one of the states, for gambling winnings. This is where you've had gambling winnings at a casino and income was withheld. Also, it could be for a refund of state or local income taxes. This is only for the states who have income taxes. There are 7 states, Nevada, Texas, Florida, or a few that of those 7 that do not have state income taxes, and there will be nothing in this category. But other states, you might have on the 1099-G reported unemployment compensation, gambling winnings, or refunds of state and local income taxes. This is where you've paid taxes to a state, you overpaid the taxes and got a refund back. Well, if you also deducted that on your federal tax return that in the previous year, then it becomes, the refund becomes income this year on the federal return. Here we're looking at the chart for the tax treaty from South Korea. This is just an example to get you familiar with the tax charts. It shows a treaty code of 19, which is income, and under study and training, which is the 19 code, it shows as a subcategory compensation during training. And this is the amount that's excluded by a South Korean student from their income. In this case, it's $2,000 a year, and it's under Treaty Article 21 in parentheses 1. This information will need to be entered on the in the tax software as you go. But again, like I said, this is in your resource guide, so it's readily available for you. Next, we're looking at a Form 1040-NR-EZ. Most of our returns would qualify for an EZ form, and if you're doing a paper return, this is the form that you will use. However, in the electronic filing software, it's on the 1040-NR form. NR is the longer form of the tax return, and it's kind of insignificant when you're filing electronically. But the reason that they use the NR form in the software is that IRS at this time will only accept the NR electronic form. It will not accept the 1040-NR-EZs at this time. So the software companies convert the EZ into an NR format to file with the IRS. But in this case, we're looking at the entity section of the 1040-NR-EZ. 1040-NR would be virtually the same. Again, your name, what we call entity information, your name, address, the country that you're from, your address in the foreign country, and whether you're single or married, non-resident. Next is just a picture of the form. There's no real example on this, but just to give you an idea what the form looks like. And while you're doing the return, and we'll mention it later, that you can always go to a summary print and see how your entries actually look on the tax return before you actually finish it and have it ready to file. But line 3 is wages. Line 4 is taxable refunds of the state and local income taxes. 5 is our scholarships and fellowships, grants that would qualify for exclusion. Again, this is under the domestic rules. Tuition, fees, books, and required equipment for classwork would be excludable from income if the scholarship or grant is used completely for that. On line 6, it shows all the wages and scholarships that are being excluded by treaty. Now, in this case, you may have, let's say in South Korea, you could exclude $2,000 of income, let's say you also had $5,000 of scholarship. In this case, you would show $7,000 of exempted income in total on the tax return, and that goes on line 7. So in this case, you would need to add both the excluded income and the excluded scholarships for a total on this line. And then the form just goes down. You don't have to worry about computations, with the exception of that one I just mentioned, possible small addition problem. But all the rest of it is done by the software, all the computations. It'll fill in all the lines, all the information for you. It will ask you, it's a menu-driven system that asks you simple questions. You fill in the boxes, and it populates the tax form for you so that you don't have to do any of those calculations. It'll compute the tax, it'll compute the refunds, everything for you. And here's some examples. Again, wages will go on box 1. Your state and local income tax refunds would go on 1099. Will go on line 4 from the 1099-G. Again, this is where you've deducted state or local income taxes the year before, and for this year, the refund from those would become taxable on the federal return. On line 7, again, we mentioned that you would add up your total wages and scholarships that are exempted by treaty and put on this line. And then this is state tax withheld is treated as income. State income tax paid would be a itemized deduction that you could take on, well, on the 1040N REZ, it's line 11. Okay, on both the 1040N REZ and the NR, there's many questions, and this is kind of what it looks like when it prints on the form. I'm going to skip over many of these right now because we'll get into when we look at going through the software itself. As you can see, there's a number of questions. We'll go through each of those. Primarily, the questions are to determine if you're still non-resident or resident for the substantial presence test. Also, what type of visa you're on, how many days you were in the United States, and so forth. For that information, the foreign student will need their passport with them. They must bring their passport to do the tax return. And the date stamps in the passport will show when they entered and left the United States. Okay, now let's switch over and look at how to start the 1040NR in Tax Slayer, which is the tax program the VITA program uses. Again, if you're not a VITA volunteer looking at this video, then any other of the tax software out there that contains NR provisions, I would suggest that you might look on the irs.gov, type in the search box free file taxes. There are some companies that provide free services for the foreign students and do contain the NR forms. Not all do, but some do. And so you can actually file your own taxes for free if you have some understanding, if you've gone through this course and have some understanding of how to do your taxes. I want to mention first, at least for the VITA program, that there will be an intake sheet that all taxpayers must fill out. There's one for domestic and there's one for non-residents or the foreign students. It goes through and has, before you start doing the tax return, it has the taxpayer fill out all the information that you will need to complete the tax return. You'll need to review that intake sheet with the taxpayer to make sure the entries are filled out correctly, or if there's any missing information, then they'll need to get to obtain the information. If they didn't bring their passport or something like that, then they may need to go home and come back a different time to finish the return. But this way, it helps prevent you having to get in doing the tax return, get right in the middle of the tax return and find out they don't have the information they needed to complete the return. So you'll go over the intake sheet with them first. Possibly there will be a greeter or a intake person to have them fill out the form and review it with them before it goes to the tax preparer. But if there is no such person, then the tax return preparer is ultimately responsible for checking the intake sheet to make sure it's complete before they start the tax return. Here is a sample of it's a form 13614NR. It's what we call the intake sheet. And this one is specifically for non-resident aliens or foreign students. It asks all the basic questions that you need for the tax return. You know, what's your name, what's your address, what's your birth date, what country are you from, how long have you been in the United States, what visa are you on, have you ever changed visas, if you have dependents, which is fairly rare, list all the dependents and their information, your current immigration status, which is generally F1 as a student, how many times you came and departed the United States, if you filed tax returns last year, what year, or in the past, what years were they for, and so forth. And then it gets into asking you your different types of income. Did you have scholarships, grants? Did you have wages? Did you have interest, dividends, so forth, and possibly some of the deductions like student loan interest or state and local income taxes or contributions possibly. This gives you all the information on one sheet that you can use, and then once you start, you can prepare the tax return fairly rapidly through the software since the questions have been filled out for you. Okay, let's look at where you start. Log into the Tax Slayer program or other program that you might be using. For Vita Sites, the site coordinator will have you set up in the software as a user. So you go in this particular example is also a page of the practice lab that anyone can use. You have to register for it first, it's free, and then it allows you to actually do a practice return in the software. In this case, is Tax Slayer software. And then for a real return, it would be start return. Next, it says what's your filing status. Now, again, this is Tax Slayer software. Other programs may look or be arranged a little differently, but they're all about the same. They'll eventually ask all the questions. What's your filing status? You'll go to the last category, non-resident alien. Now, by checking that box, it'll bring in the forms and other forms and information sheets that you need to do a non-resident alien return. Next, what's your filing status? Again, you're either a single non-resident alien or you're a married non-resident alien. If you're not sure if you're married, like I said, ask your wife. Personal information, your name, your birth date, your social security number. In some cases, students may have an ITIN number, individual taxpayer identification number, instead of a social security number. That's fine too. You just enter that instead of the social security number. Next will be the Schedule OI. This is all under the basic information section. Under the Schedule OI, you'll have general information, dates entered and left the United States, and income exempt from taxes. On the Tax Slayer program, and other programs are similar, you'll have a tax, what we call a tree on the left side of the page that you're looking at in the software. And on this tree, we'll have the different sections of the tax return. You start out with basic information, which is, again, your entity information, name, address, social security number, birthday, so forth. Also, it will have the form OI there for your basic information, the visa type, the dates entered and left the United States, and so forth. To start out into to listing income, you go to the federal section under income. And this tree allows you to skip around to the different sections if you need to. But if you take it in order, that's generally how the tax return flows. So the OI form is in the basic information section, like it says. If you have a 1042-S from one of the universities, it would be down in the payments and estimates section of the forms tree. And then all students have to do the form 8843. All foreign students have to do the form 8843. It's required of all non-resident students. And that's in the miscellaneous forms section, and we'll see those in just a moment. Basic information, like I said, there's filing status, personal information, possibly you might have dependents, and the 1040 NR Schedule OI. So generally almost everyone will fill out 3 of those sections. You'll go over to either begin, or if you need to go back and change something, you can go back to that section and then back to the section under basic information like filing status. If you need to edit the information you put in, then you can do so. Schedule OI, again, same information. General information, dates entered and departed the United States, and your income exempt from taxes. Okay, this is a sample of the general information for the Schedule OI. It'll ask you for the type of entity. Again, if you see a box with the down arrow, click the arrow. It'll be a drop-down menu of the choices. Country of citizenship, country of residence, U.S. travel information. Have you applied for a green card? Have you ever been a U.S. citizen? Have you ever had a green card? Have you changed your visa? Number of days you were here in the last, this year and the last 2 years prior to that. Again, this is for the purposes of determining the substantial presence test to see if you're still non-resident or possibly have changed status to resident. If you've been here for more than a year, you may have filed a tax return in previous years. Check that box. The other 2 boxes you'll hardly ever check because you're not filing a tax return for a trust, and almost no students I know of have compensation over $250,000. Okay, the number of days that you were present, again, for the last 3 years. The next one, were you subject to tax in a foreign country and U.S. exempt income? That's check. Do not check that box. In other words, the answer is no. And also, have you used an alternate method to determine your source of income? Again, don't check that box. Basically, the answer is no. The next one you'll need to fill out, wages exempt by treaty. So you'll put in your tax exempt income in that box. The next section deals with real property, and most foreign students do not have the entry in that section. Your current travel dates in the U.S. In this category, just show the dates that you're entered and departed. You may have more than one. Show the total. Also asks name of the country, number of months claimed, and amount of exempt income. So like our example of South Korea, we'd show that we're from the Republic of South Korea. Our exempt income was $2,000 from income, possibly $5,000 from scholarships. So we show the total amount of exempt income. Okay, going into the federal section of the tax return, we look at the different forms that you may have received from payers of wages, interest, dividends, other forms. You click each one that applies of the forms that you received. It could be like from the state for state or local income taxes. It could be for casinos on a 1099-G for unemployment. You may receive all the different forms. You may have unemployment compensation. I doubt it, but you might. And if you've ever worked off campus or have been in business for yourself and the employer, let's say you've worked off campus and the employer treated you as a contract laborer rather than an employee, they may send you a 1099 miscellaneous. Chances are you were supposed to be an employee, they've done it wrong. But you may have other instances where where you've had a business of your own and had self-employment income. If you did, generally, this may be in violation of your visa. Immigration you're usually allowed to work on campus with the approval of the school or off campus with the approval of immigration. They only allow certain types of employment, and usually self-employment is not one of them. Okay, after the income section, if you have a Form 1042-S, you'll go to the Payments and Estimates section. At the very bottom category of the two columns will be Foreign Persons U.S. Source Income 1042-S. You go into that. Generally, those forms are only issued by the universities. Most foreign students would not see one issued by an employer, but it's possible. Now, the next section you need to go to, and this is for everyone, they need to go to the miscellaneous forms section, and at the very bottom of that category, there is a form exempt and individuals with a medical condition. Well, this only applies to a foreign student as an exempt individual. In other words, exempt from the substantial presence test. Just ignore the medical condition part. And it's Form 8843. You'll need to click that and fill out that form. Okay, we're about to finish up here, but one last section of the tax return is health insurance. Most non-resident students are exempt from the medical insurance, but you may have to fill out the section to show that you are exempt from having medical insurance required in the United States. Now, if it's possible, you may have marketplace insurance, in which you've applied for and obtained insurance through the marketplace. In that case, that's rare for foreign students, but it's possible. In that case, you'll be issued a Form 1095A, and you will need to bring that form, the taxpayers need to bring that form with them to be able to finish the tax return. Okay, finishing up the return, when do I file a non-resident income tax return? Okay, if you're doing a Form 1040-NR and the 8843, remember all non-resident students need to complete the 8843 and the 1040-NR. If you have a 1040-NR, then the filing deadline is April 15th of 2019, or generally it's April 15th of every year unless extended by holidays or something like that, or weekends. If you're only filing the Form 8843, then that form alone, or if you're filing a 1040-NR with no wages subject to withholding, then you could file on you could file on June 15th is what's normal, but apparently there's a holiday or weekend in 2019, so the actual date would be June 17th. Again, you file these 8843 with the IRS Service Center, and same with the 1040-NR. And where do you file that? You file it with the Internal Revenue Service in Austin, Texas, 73301. All non-resident returns go to the Austin Service Center. That's our own zip code, so you don't need a street address to go there. Now, this is only if you're filing a paper return. Now, if you're filing electronically, it's automatically sent to the IRS. You don't have to worry about any of this part. You do have to worry about the filing deadline, though. Okay, now I mentioned before that Uh, some employers may inadvertently, or some unfortunately on purpose, have withheld Social Security and Medicare taxes from your wages. For foreign students, this is not correct. Foreign students are not subject to Social Security taxes if you're on the F1 or J1 visas. So what do you do if they have withheld those taxes? Well, you can try to get them back. Number one, you have to go back to the employer and request the wages or the money be returned to you. Like I said, most U.S. employers are not familiar with foreign taxes, so they may not have known this. But if they can refund the taxes back to you and amend their returns that they filed with the government. If for whatever reason it's too big of a problem or they just refuse to do it, then it's up to you to claim your own refund of the Social Security wages withheld and Medicare taxes withheld. And for that, it's a lot of problems for the foreign students, but it may be several $100s that you're talking about, so it may be worth your while. You'll file a claim form 843. It's a U.S. tax form, a claim form, and attach a form 8316 along with this. The 8316 is just an information sheet, but it will speed up the process of processing the claim. If you don't send it in, then chances are the IRS will send it back to you to complete after many weeks, and then you send it back in. The processing is slowed down. But so try to send in the 8316 information sheet with the 843 claim form, and then there's a lot of other documentation you'll need to file. We'll see in a moment. Here's a picture of the 843 claim form. To get one, you can go to irs.gov under Forms and Publications. All of our forms and publications are online now. Type in the search box form 843 or just 843, and it'll pull that up and you can print it out. Would like to mention on line 3A, it says the type of tax. In this case, it's employment taxes that we're dealing with. So be sure and check that box. They want an explanation on the back of why. Here is an example of the verbiage under Section 5. This is an example of the verbiage that you should put in there. It could be something similar to this. This is kind of preferred language developed by some of the IRS personnel to really validate your claim of getting these taxes back. This particular verbiage here mentions the year 2006. You may want to change the tax year there. Okay, the attachments that you have to send in with 843. For F1 students, you have to send a copy of the W-2 where they withheld those Social Security wages and Medicare taxes, copy of your I-94, copy of your valid entry visa, a copy of the Form I-20. If you're on optional practical training or OPT, then a copy of your EAD or your employment authorization. Again, that Form 8316 I just mentioned. A copy of the 1040 NREZ tax return that you filed. And if you had a change of visa category, then the Form I-797. J1 exchange visitors, same information as the F1, all of those forms, plus a copy of the IAP 66 or the DS 2019. All that's put together with 843 claim form. Like I said, it's a lot of information for probably $200-300, but still it may be well worth it for you. You mail that to Department of the Treasury, Internal Revenue Service Center in Ogden, Utah, 84201. Again, this is our own zip code, so no street address is needed. To finish up this course, I would like to mention some resources that are available. Again, the IRS webpage, www.irs.gov, is a wealth of information for forms, for publications. One other publication I might want to mention is publication 519 for U.S. Tax Guide for Aliens. It could be helpful to you, although it could be complicated. The IRS toll-free number that you can call in for questions. A lot of times it's a little difficult to get in. Once you get in, it may take a while because not everyone at the IRS also is familiar with foreign student taxes. But that number is 1-800-829-1040. Your publication 4011 desk guide, as I showed you, or resource guide, is you should have at your VITA site, or it's available online also for those who are not participating in VITA. It's a walkthrough of just about everything we've talked about today, but it's there at your fingertips for reference when you need it. So it's an excellent publication. Also, I would like to mention, if you go to the TaxSlayer practice lab for those who are in the VITA program, there's under the practice lab homepage, there is a little section on NR returns, and it will guide you through using the TaxSlayer software doing a non-resident return. Well, I hope that helped you, and I hope you're able to file your taxes without too much difficulty. There's not many VITA or AARP sites that do non-resident aliens. You'll need to look on irs.gov for the one nearest you. Like I said, you can do your own, if you're fairly comfortable with it, you can do your own tax return online. For one, through the IRS Free File Alliance, which is a consortium about 6 or 7 software companies that provide free online filing for persons. They usually have different income limits and so forth. You'll need to check on that, and not all of those have NR forms available. Thank you for your time, and good luck on your taxes.